Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings to all of you. I see a few people have started to line up here. To Doris Robinson, Hotep, Lisa, Wolf Manlou, Stephen McKenzie, Shonda Henderson, one of our real dedicated sisters, Lao Tzu, Chad Jomo Kenyatta. Let's see if we got anybody else here. Sister Robin, who is always up there in the beginning. Brother Ugawa. Let's see who else we have here. Yeah, that seems. Yeah, greetings to all of you. We've had a series of shows in the last 4 weeks off and on, but generally 4 weeks. On past shows, there was a reason for doing that. I want to encourage anyone that's new to hit the red button for subscription, to be a subscriber, and hit the like button, and encourage people throughout the show to do the same thing. To Patrick Brown, how you doing? I want to give people a little report on how the show has been doing. You know, this hasn't been easy to do this show because our message isn't exactly designed for YouTube and Facebook. They like people up here gossiping and talking what I call the ignorant stuff. So we've been on the slow algorithm, and so you need to help in terms of encouraging people to come to the show and subscribe. But we've developed a good dedicated following, and it's spreading globally. So I want to give you a little report. In the last 28 days, we had 8,235 people who viewed the show. Now, for a lot of shows, that's not much, but for this show, that's good because, you know, we're building a solid following. close to 20% of our subscribers watch the show regularly. So we have, and then of this 8,235 viewers in the last 28 days, 21% have been between the ages of 25 and 44 years of age. We've been particularly shooting at the younger audience. We know we're going to pick up the older conscious audience, but if that's all we're doing is speaking to the choir, then the question is, what's the point of the show? So that's good to hear. We need to improve that. Our audience, the biggest viewers, but there are others that are not listed here, but on their analytics, because we know others because we're interacting with them on a daily basis. The largest number of viewership comes from the United States. Secondly, the United Kingdom. Thirdly, South Africa. Then Canada, Barbados, and Kenya. But we also know we have a lot of people who are watching the show coming from Ghana, from Nigeria, from other parts of Africa, and other parts of the world. But that global viewership is good. And then what's interesting is, in addition to people watching the show, we have an increasing number of people who are going to our library. We've done over 173 shows. Now, some of those are repeats. So like we've done a few repeats, but almost all of those are new shows. So people are, in addition to coming to the show, they're going to the library, which I call chapters in a book. And the two most popular they've been going to recently is the one with Sheikh Anta Diop. Over 80,000 viewers have gone to that. And we need to post something on that site to encourage people to subscribe, because there's nothing on that site saying that. And that's showing people have good taste. They're going to the master, Sheikh Anta Diop. And then the second most popular view in our film library is the one that you just got through watching last week, the 10,000 years of Kemetic history, showing the Chwa as the founders of ancient Kemet, which shows, again, our viewers have good taste, because you're going to new stuff. This is new history. It's old history, but in terms of historiography, this is a new school of history, and a number of other new schools that are spinning out of it. And it flows out of the mother principle, return to the African mother principle of male and female equality, that identified the Chwa as the creators of the just societies of Africa, based on the formula, these words come from God, not me, they come through me, where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. And then after writing that book, then I realized other implications, because God's mind is a totality. And when God gives you something, they're giving you the whole of a part. And so they were giving me the whole vision of just societies. By the way, that formula is new. No historian has ever seen that, knew that before. They didn't know this was the basis for Chwa just societies. And they're at the foundation of humanity. They're the first people. And then the foundation of just societies. And it's global. So people go into this is new history. And I might say that those of you that haven't read Dr. Finch's book that's just come out on Nile Valley Civilization, 10,000 Year History, you should read it. It's good. It's not really dealing with the 10,000 year period, but it is dealing with, I think, the best summary of dynastic history that I've seen written by any African scholar. It's quite good. And this is a brother who's grounded, and I'm going to get him on the show so he can share his views on that. So check out Dr. Finch's book and get it and read it. Um, Before getting in today's show, I wanted to make oh, good. Robin's got the book. It's a good book, too, and it's laid out nice. He's got illustrations for a lot of chapters. With each chapter, the cover is beautiful. The whole layout's good, but it's the content that is really good. And currently, I'm doing research on what will be my 9th book on the founders of Kemet and the Anu people. I'm doing research. And so while I'm finishing my 6th and 7th book and doing research on my 8th, which will be the San Francisco Freedom Movement, I'm also doing research on this 9th book. That's what happens when I transition from one piece of writing to the other. Then what I'm doing is doing research on the next projects. And this 9th book is going to be kind of an extension of the mother principle and the integration trap. The integration trap, generation gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, that's an extension of the mother principle in chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5. That's showing Chua civilization is spread throughout the world. But chapter 1 is really addressing the condition of African people today in the U.S. That's why the book's called The Choice Between Two Cultures. So those two, one extends the other. And then the 9th book will be the vast expansion of that. Because when God gives you something, most of you don't know what that means because you think, oh, you Christian trained, so you think, no, nobody can communicate with God. God's in you, communicates with all of us. And then some of us who do hard work, we're privileged enough to get some insight that you call breakthrough, which is innovation. And so the mother principle is considered a classic. Dr. Theophilo Benga described Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality as a classic. And he said that this book should, the term I used for African families, twinlineal, should be in the dictionary. And for sisters who are looking for a model or paradigm, or brothers, that is just male-female model, then it's in this book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. And this is, of all the things I've done, the most difficult. Beating the Bank of America, the biggest bank in the world. Now that was something. And I've had other victories on the battlefield, but this was the hardest thing I ever did and the most beautiful thing that I ever did. This book is dedicated formally to my grandmother, Catherine Filardi, whose picture is on the inside of the book, and is the original of that hangs over my bed. But the book is really dedicated to God, and it's a thank you for the beautiful light. Native Americans, when they laid out war strategy, if they had a spiritual leader who was also general, like Sitting Bull, then Sitting Bull's defeat of Custer at Little Bighorn came from a vision. And African people have generally worked their stuff from visions. People like Marx, who I don't put down, because if you want to do a revolution and equitably distribute the wealth, I'm not against it, because it definitely is inequitably distributed in the world today. But the vision that God gave me on the just societies is even stronger, because it is a formula that says, and see, God revealed to me when I asked, after, this was in 1990, after 30 years of battles and 30 years of study and going through 15 months of internal looking at myself that I've explained before, God rewarded me with this beautiful light on what is the basis of just societies. Next week, you're going to see a show on how innovation occurs on different levels. And so that will be the follow-up for what I'm talking about right now. So when God gives me this vision, it isn't just a vision, but it is a vision of the people who carried out the most just society and the most creative people and the founders of world civilization and the founders of ancient Kemet that nobody studies. That's my specialty. Why should I cover what others have covered? I'm not wasting my time on that. Now, if you've made some serious errors, well, maybe I comment. I ain't write no book on it. So they gave me the key to the world's first people, the Twa, who are the Kun, San people, Kalahari Desert. Some of you that have been watching this 5-part series, I think it is, on the Kun, on the Twa, that's them, mitochondrial DNA, 149,000 years ago, give or take 10,000 years, because the error rate of mitochondrial DNA, which is the DNA of the mother that never dies out, is 10,000, forward or backward. I like dating systems that are the best. So DNA is my favorite dating system, in terms of dating time. And going straight to the source is my best research system. So when God privileges you with the answer to the key to the just societies, those of you that don't believe that I got this from God, why would I say it? I have a healthy ego, so I, have no problem saying I came up with this all on my own. Great. But I didn't. Like Einstein didn't say he came up with the theory of relativity all on his own. George Washington Carver didn't say all those breakthroughs in science came all on their own. It came through their hard work, their knowledge, but they had average knowledge. And that's the lower mind, the mind of reason. But the higher knowledge, that's the mind of God. And so I call it piping into God's mind. That's been my experience through the beautiful light I've explained before. Some of you haven't heard it. I'm not going into it today. And it's so God's a great light. And that great light gave part of that light to me. It was an answer telepathically. But when God speaks to you, unlike the logical mind, see, when Marx did his thing, Marx came from the logical mind. So he came up with a lot of stuff on economics, which isn't bad. Do you know what I mean? I read his stuff. I'm not a Marxist, but I read his stuff. The limit is the logical mind can only see in a dimension. But when you get God giving you stuff, that's the whole of a part, or what I've explained in other shows when it comes to the Dogon, in Dogon philosophy, where I cut my teeth. In any part of it is the whole of it. And anything is everything. You say, well, what is that? You're the miniature of the cosmos. That's what that is. Someone sent me a thing on my Facebook page showing me the ring of a tree and comparing it to a fingerprint. They're virtually identical. So anyone that thinks that God created this cosmos disconnected doesn't know the first thing about physics, astrophysics, or anything. We're all miniature parts of this bigger part. And so 2% of us in a field sometimes get the chance to go into something new. My wife keeps asking me, how can it be new? New in that no one's seen it before. It's not new in the sense that we invented it. No, these are truths already there. So the theory of relativity, it was already there, but no one knew it before, at least in the modern world. Einstein got it through a dream, but he knew quantum physics, but he was an average physicist. This is what put him into the other realm. And so in my case, God is giving me the formula for how the world's oldest people ran their society. Not in one dimension, in its totality. All the males and females being equally empowered to govern every phase of society, every phase. Note that. And so when when God gives you something, it's like a symbol. And you see parts of the symbol over time. John Henry Clark, when I was interviewing him, I apprenticed under him for about 25 years. We spoke together on a number of occasions, And I called him regularly in the last 8 months of his life every week. And I noted how his mind worked. He called it like a circle, but I've said this before, but it was like a spiral. And if you ask him the same question twice, he'd never give you the same answer 2 times because he's looking at it from a different angle. When God speaks to you, God gives you the whole of a part, in this case, the whole of the part which is just societies. And so you only see part of it in time, and then part, and then you see more, and you see more, and you see more. It's like a symbol, you know? So I'm saying that to say that this is the key for the future and now. And I will be going through pretty soon in-depth twinlineal families to give you, because I did in-depth research on this, to give you how this works. Because this is the healer for families. This is the healer for communities. And at another level, it's the healer for nations. It's another level because it's every phase of society. But it starts with the family. And by the way, Marx ignored families in his study of Marxism. And say, I'm not taking down Marxism. I'm just making a critique of what's limited when you're just coming from the logical mind. Because if you're going to talk about revolution, or if you're going to talk about economic systems, then you need to start with the foundation of economic systems. And what's that? Family systems. Ignored that. Morgan studied the Iroquois Confederacy. Ingalls, who worked with Marx, then took that and did a book on the state, the family, and private property. And that was Marx's exposure to the family. But he never studied Native American families. He never studied anything African. And yet we have the most just societies on the planet Earth. But we're going everywhere else for our answers other than home. John Henry Clark used to always say, you know, because he had been attached to the Communist Party. He was never a communist, but he was a socialist and a nationalist. And he said, you know, what did he need with their theory on economics when we had a communal economic order, sharing of the air, the land, and the water, meaning everyone had a right, as the spiritual song says, to the tree of life. And now you got to pay for everything. When they figure it out, you'll be paying for air. And right now it's polluted enough that they've created the conditions for you to want it. And then some people do pay for it because they need respiration and all this kind of stuff. So I'm just, and this also will indirectly touch on the topic that I'll be dealing with today, but on another level. I wanted to make a few comments on the genocide that's going on in the Gaza and increasing attacks in the West Bank. This isn't just a tragedy. This is beyond horrible and terrible. You hear me? And we, a people who have gone through hell, know what hell is. To be bombed for now more than 2 months, to have food, water, electricity cut off from you, to have hospitals destroyed, most of them. I think they have 11 left of the 51 that they had in Gaza. To have your schools destroyed and have almost all the housing people are living in destroyed with them buried under, and then them to have the nerve to say it's 19,000 people. Yeah, so the media created this 19,000. There's no way in the world it's 19. If it isn't a couple of 100,000, not one of them's dead. How can they count all those people under the rubble? And the United States bears primary responsibility for this because they're arming these suckers. And then the president of the United States has the nerve to send a military advisor to advise these suckers. Netanyahu, the most right-wing government that they've had. What they're doing is collective mass punishment for what Hamas did. And then the media is taking this out of context. They're under settler colonialism. Settler colonialism usually means genocide. This country was formed on settler colonialism. And what did it lead to? 90% of the native people here, Native Americans, were genocided. They did the same thing in Australia and many other parts of the world. So what you're seeing now is ethnic cleansing. The obvious move of the Israeli government is to flatten the Gaza, to flatten it. So there's nothing there, to encourage them to leave so that they can grab that land. And then they're making intrusions on the people from the West Bank. Hey, Lawrence, how you doing, brother? I told you I need some help. So contact me. You can contact me by way of getting into my, computer or whatever, but I'll talk to you about that later. So this is genocide. And then these lame reporters of the corporate media have got the nerve to debate or to ask, even the progressive media, is this genocide? And until recently, they were saying no. You shut off everything that's the key to life of people, then bomb them, then tell them to go somewhere else for safety and bomb them. You understand? Huh? And you don't call that genocide? That's exactly what's happening. And the people of both Gaza and the West Bank have been in an open air concentration camp for over 70 years. And the United States is financing this. So there needs to be an end to this. Some people are calling for a two-state solution. I don't know what to call for because it's up to the Palestinian people. I don't know if there's any room for a two-state solution, given how much of the land the Israelis have grabbed. This needs to stop. It's for the people to determine what they want. And this no good government of the United States of America needs to back off. And then Biden playing games, talking about Netanyahu needs to lighten up on what he's doing. He's given them the green light to go ahead. And he's agreed that they're going to do it now for a couple of more months. What will be left of the people, let alone of anything else? Huh? Did the Zionists learn anything from the extermination that they faced at the hands of Jews? Did they learn anything? It appears like nothing. I'm not saying that about all Jews, because you have some Jews that have stood up and are opposing this, including younger Jews. So right on for you. But the fact of the matter is, this is an attack against humanity. These are war criminals that are carrying it out. They're mass murderers. They're savages. They're just as savage and barbaric as the people that run this country that have pulled the same thing, carrying out their genocide. So our hearts go out to the Palestinian people. And we support them in whatever way we can. And we understand the terrible plight they're in. It hurts us to see this. And it's good to see the demonstrations that are going on around the country and around the world against this. And if there's one thing that the Israelis have done, I think they have killed themselves when it comes to carrying any kind of weight internationally. I don't think they can survive from this. The person here is asking, is this the same show on spirituality? You hear about Gaza. Yeah, it is. But guess what? People dying is spiritual. Guess what? And it doesn't just have to be us. And it just so happens the people who are dying right now have been very supportive of our struggles as we have of them. So this is what we do on this show. I'm a revolutionary. Among the African-centered scholars, I'm the only one. And I need help. Of course, there's one that's not as well known, Dr. Akinyele Umoja. He's another one. So now, what I want to get into now is the topic for today, spirit, the missing dimension of Kemetic and African-American civilizations. Now, it's going to be interesting how this one goes. It's not going to go the way you think it's going to go, because I combine practice with theory. So there's going to be practice in here so that you can see the relevance of this. Spirit, the missing dimension of Kemetic and African American history. Now, what does this mean? The overall purpose of this discussion is to address the issue of spirit and its meaning in the context of African and African American civilization. When I say African American, I'm not just referring to Africans in America, but the Americas, the Caribbean, South America, whatnot. And so when I'm talking about the missing dimension, spirit being the missing dimension, I'm not saying that it wasn't there when it was created. I'm saying if you read the body of the text advertising this show, that it is often missing in the accounts of ancient African history by some of our most significant scholars, not by all. We have some who understand the role of spirit in African civilization. Dr. Finch is one of those, and there are others. John Henry Clark, Doc Ben, they're among those. One reason why those two had a serious grounding in spirit is they were not trained in the Western system of miseducation. And that's a major reason that they had firm grounding. John Henry Clark hardly ever talked about spirituality in that depth. He would talk about the Black Jesus and stuff like that. But if you knew him, you would know that he was always drawn from this deep reservoir, very spiritual. And he had the quality that comes not just with age, but with good character, wisdom, and humility. And those qualities represent key essentials in what he had to contribute. And there are others. So I'm not going into any name calling and saying this scholar has it and this one doesn't. I'm simply saying that too often in the portrayal of Kemet, in the portrayal of ancient African or traditional African civilizations, and too often in the portrayal of African American history, the spirit dimension is either minimized or left out. Why? First, if you're trained in the Western Academy, you were told that this is not intellectual. This is mumbo jumbo, you know? And so some of our scholars have become ashamed of mentioning this, and some of them have deep roots in the spirit tradition of African American culture. And some of them just don't see where that fits within the context of African or African American scholarship. And what they're doing, whether they realize it or not, they're imitating the paradigm of the Western Academy. And this is why Arthur Schlesinger, and I'll refer to him again later, who, when he did a counterattack against the African-centered movement, the educational movement of the 80s and 90s, he made a comment. The majority of the scholars who are fueling this movement are no threat to us. We trained them. And I don't think they knew what he meant. He meant we've trained him in take that spirit out, baby. And I don't think he even knows fully what the implication of that is, because he probably thinks it's spooky too. So he doesn't really know the danger of adding the ingredient or emphasizing the ingredient of spirit when you're dealing with African and African American civilizations, because that's the foundation. It's the foundation of Kemet. It's the foundation of all African civilization, every single one. Their legacy comes to them from the Twa, who are the strongest spirit people in the world, highest mind people. Spirit people are people who operate on the higher mind of intuition or God's mind. And then those despiritualized people, they operate on the lower mind. And in this world, The lower mind's in charge, and they just make up whatever they want to make up and call it the truth. This is Ganlo Do, African Vodun Maroon. There are a few other scholars not often brought up and are deep in the culture. I am one, and Kwasi Kanodu, both priest and Vodun in a Khan tradition. Yeah, there are. There are a number of others. So I don't want to give the impression that they're all in this other camp. But the point is, why are those that are in it? And in fact, if you're into Voodoo, or if you're into the Yoruba, or if you're into the Akan, or any of these other living systems, then you're practicing this, because it's alive. And that's also one of the problems with Kemet. Kemet is our greatest achievement in classical civilization. The Twa are the greatest achievement in civilization, period, because they give birth to what you'd call civil civilizations. John Henry Clark used to say, civilization means being civil, and they're the most civilized people the planet has ever seen. So, when we draw from these others, whether it's Voodoo, Yoruba, Asante, Dogon, Bambara, whatever, these are living systems, or African American systems. These are living systems. So you're going to be visiting the spirit. I mean, that's what it's based on. But one reason that the Kemetic excursion can sometimes be distorted is because it's not alive anymore, even though it's in Inner Africa. It drew from Inner Africa. Its priesthood isn't intact, or there may be some people that claim that they have resurrected it. It's not alive anymore. So when it gets described, it often gets described in intellectual terms that even when people are trying to be spiritual, is despiritualized. So this is the problem. The problem is that what is most important in terms of our civilization, which is its spirit foundation. And mind you, that's not enough, meaning the spirit foundation is connected to a whole bunch of things that are spirit-based, like justice and truth and a bunch of other things. It's not just spirit, because spirit alone, if it doesn't have any direction, can go in the wrong direction. There are negative spirits too. You know what I mean? So that so that's the issue we're dealing with, but we're acknowledging that we're all over the place on that. I mean, for example, the African in America, when brought to America, faced cultural war. So we coming in with the spirit civilization. We had to defend it, fight with it, and everything else. So some of us succumbed. You know what I mean? So we got areas in our culture that have been more heavily hit by European despiritualized influences, and then there's been an effort to re-spiritualize, and I'll touch on that as I go through this discussion. So this is a complicated thing, you know what I mean? And I'm not knocking anybody who is in a camp that, doesn't rest their stuff solidly on spirit. I'm just simply saying that's a problem, because some of our best scholars, some of them are in that, and their scholarship is still great. So I'm not putting them down. I'm just simply saying that this is the meaning of this discussion. So when I talk about the spirit, the missing dimension of Kemetic and African American civilizations, I want to start off with this. I had wanted to start off with one of my favorite bluesmen, Muddy Waters, and the Hoochie Coochie Man. But I didn't have time to get it set up, so I'm sorry. I've been trying to put music in, but let me just paraphrase that song. Hoochie Coochie Man, Born on the 7th hour of the 7th day in the 7th month, when the 7 doctors say, I'm born with good luck, and can't you see? I got $700, and don't you mess with me. I'm the Hoochie Coochie Man. Now, the Hoochie Coochie, some of you that are young may not know what that means, but that's referring to the man that women love. And Muddy Waters loved him some sisters. You hear me? And they loved him. And in fact, musicians always have a certain special thing going on. His brother said, Jomo with the mojo. And he goes on, I got my mojo hand. And, he talks about, I'm High John the Conqueror. I got my mojo working and I'm going to mess with you. Thanks, Brother Kenyatta. You're helping me do that isn't what's half as good as Muddy Waters. So I'm sorry. So why am I saying that? Because I want to be clear in this delving into the dimension of spirit. I'm doing a double dealing here, or a double delving into the African and the new African. And if you're from the Caribbean, it applies to you as well. If you're from South America, it applies to you. Europe, you came from one of those places, it inspires. Asia, wherever it is, it inspires, it applies to you as well. So understand, I'm not just talking about one, though I'm talking about the root Africa, the fruit, the new African. So I want to say this. My allegiance is not to the Star Spangled Banner. My allegiance is to the spiritual blues because my daddy was from Bunkie, Louisiana, and my maternal grandmother, the lovely Catherine Filardi, who was blacker than midnight and loved every inch of her blackness, she came from the birthplace of the blues, Mississippi, which is close to Louisiana. Now, while my daddy is WH, one bad warrior who kicked the behind a Klansman when he was 12 years old, refused to join the U.S. military, and told him he'd kill every redneck that he could get an M1 rifle pointed at if they were dumb enough to draft him. That was my father, one bad, loving black man. You hear me? Black women, including first my mother, they all said they felt safe around WH. And he was only about 5'8", 5'9". And if he couldn't take you fair, he had brass knuckles to settle the score. And he had a legal job. He had two jobs. I've explained this to people, but some haven't heard this. He had two jobs. He was a longshoreman. That was good money then, dangerous in World War II, unloading ammunition and all this shit. And then he had a job as a bouncer. And he had that second job because he could clean the clocks of white people, white men, and not go to jail. It was kind of like he had a badge. And he'd come home at night telling us whose clock he had cleaned that night. That means who he had whipped. And if they were too big for him, those brass knuckles came out. But when he knocked you out, you never saw the brass knuckles. Because you might get up and think you could beat him. But if you could hit that hard and they Can you all hear me? We got cut off. The power went off. Somebody let me know on the bottom of the chat whether you can hear me. Can you see me now? Okay, good. Sorry, at least I know how to boot this up. I've never had this before, and who knows what was going on with that. Let me see if I can get something else on here. Yeah, you got some light on. Okay, so you can hear. We've been doing 3 years of this. This ain't happening. But fortunately, the power went out and came right back on. Okay, so I was explaining. Let me go back on this one. This show is going to be dealing with spirit, the missing dimension of Kemetic and African American civilization. So I'm making the point that this is going to be a twofold visit of spirit, both African and African American. And I was making the point that my allegiance is not to the Star Spangled Banner, but from the blues that comes from Mississippi and Louisiana. And I was pointing out that my father was WH, and I was getting into this point. My spiritual father was High John the Conqueror. And again, when you're dealing with Muddy Waters and the Hoochie Coochie Man, he's making mention of High John the Conqueror. He says, I'm going to use High John the Conqueror and I'm going to mess with you. Who was High John the Conqueror? That means High John the Conqueror. And it's an African warrior spirit carried from Africa to the U.S. and the Americas. But this was a special spirit for the Africans in the United States. If a mother wanted to get her child in line, she'd say, High John the Conqueror going to get you. But High John the Conqueror was a spirit of Nat Turner, Sojourner Truth. All of our warrior people who resisted, and most of them were warriors, they resisted in different ways. And so High John the Conqueror was a spirit, and this spirit was carried on board what was called the good ship Jesus. Good for what is the question. And was carried on the Amistad, which was the ship that carried Senku, who was of the Poro Society, the warrior societies of Africa. And he led a successful slave rebellion aboard ships, sliced the throats of a lot of those so-called slave masters, and won his freedom later. But that was a spirit that imbued the African and American. And we had these warrior spirits all over the Western Hemisphere, and of course, coming out of Africa. So all of these spirits instilled within us the continuation of the spirit of Africa, which is the foundation of African civilization. Spirit is the foundation of all African civilization, but you'd never guess it reading some of the history on Kemet and on ancient Africa. You'd never guess it. And it is this spirit foundation that you find in African civilization carried to the Americas, in this case, the United States, that inspired us to create a new African or African American culture and a new African art form, which is African, but new, because we had to fight to recreate this culture here. And this culture and art form is one of the most beautiful, magnificent cultures and art forms on the planet Earth. And it puts a smile on humanity's face worldwide. If you listen to a lot of the people in the Gaza who are being bombed and blown up and everything else, a lot of their youth are into hip hop, and they got messages of freedom using their own language and promoting the cause of freedom among their own people, and that's global. So spirit is at the foundation of all African cultures. It is the driving principle of all African cultures, yet we have historians who are very good in every other respect, who will omit it. And some will say, why? Well, it's found in all cultures. So, well, if truth is found in all cultures, let's say it is, are you going to dismiss it because it's in all other cultures? If something's that universal, it must be extremely important. That's a reason to include it, not exclude it. You hear what I'm saying? Huh? So when we're dealing with this spirit, it is what inspires all of our creators, almost all, to say the same thing. I'm going to bring beauty out of ugliness because we came into a world, this Western Hemisphere, the Caribbean, South America, I don't care where it was, ugly in its treatment. And so I don't care what the landscape looked like. If you're being beaten, flogged, limbs being torn apart and everything else, freedom being denied, I don't care how good the environment looks, it looks like hell. That's what it looks like. And so each of our people in each of the places where they were, the Caribbean, South America, the US, and this area, went into their souls. In the case of the Caribbean, South America, they continued at African culture. We recreated one here. Fundamentally African. But creativity is our hallmark here. It had to be for us to carry on. And spirit has been at the core of this. Spirit. And what is spirit? Ultimately, it's the higher mind. It's God. It's God. And when you draw on that, that's why the only successful rebellion against slavery, and I've covered this in 3 shows, 2 of which focused on the Haitian Revolution, the only successful rebellion against slavery was Africans in Haiti. They're the only ones in the whole wide history of the whole wide world that succeeded. And the key was the power of voodoo, power of spirit. You hear me? So you're going to hear spirit running through this, but it's going to come in a way that's different than what you expect. That's what I like to do. I'm a strategist. We always come at angles, you know? So I want to dedicate this show to 2 great warriors, Dr. Nathan Hare, the founder of Black Studies, and my buddy who is probably going through the last stages of his life. I've got to go see him next week. And I want to thank all the people who have been supportive of him, and Marvin X at the head of that, who's a poet coming out of the Black Arts movement. He's been very supportive of my good friend, Dr. Nathan Hare. So I'm dedicating this to Dr. Nathan Hare, the father of Black Studies, that came into being at San Francisco State University, and Sister Miriam Wadi, M-A-R apostrophe Y-U-M, Wadi, W-A-D-A-I. She's 92 years old now. They're both in the same center. She's recovering from a fall. And this is a woman that's taken very good care of her health throughout her life. She's over 6 feet tall. And she was really the Black consciousness spirit that provided the spark for the leaders of the strike at San Francisco State, particularly Benny Stewart, who acknowledged, and he was the leader of the Black Student Union that launched the strike at San Francisco State, and a very good brother, who also has church roots, holiness church roots. His church was right around the corner from our headquarters, the Malcolm X Unity House. So I'm dedicating this to these 2 beautiful spirits, and you'll see why in a minute. So the topic for today, Spirit, the Missing Dimension of Kemetic and African American Civilization, is going to be located, as I deal with this topic, within the context of the 1990s and the context of the African-centered cultural renaissance of the 90s that stood on the foundation of the Black freedom movement of the 50s and 60s, commonly called the Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power movement, and the Black Studies movement, and then later the Pan-Africanist and Black Panther movements, because the Panthers were also key to the strike, and they themselves were a product of these earlier movements. So the African-centered cultural renaissance of the 1990s was fueled by African-centered scholars. It's the only time in this country that they launched a movement. Now, you had a cultural renaissance, a Black cultural renaissance in the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s. But here, we're talking, those were poets and musicians and other artists. Here we're talking about scholars that actually helped trigger a movement. And the majority of these scholars were not activists. They weren't organizers, but they encouraged activism. And I'm the only one among them that, was at this level of being a revolutionary. Others were progressive or whatever. Some may have been active in community struggles. But the key point is this African cultural renaissance of the 90s, fueled by African-centered scholars, inspired hip-hoppers, and was an expression also of the Pan-African movements of African unity going on prior to that time and at that time. And some of the African-centered scholars were Pan-Africanists, like Dr. Wade Nobles, for example, and others. All of them supported Pan-Africanism. John Henry Clark, of course, was a central spokesperson and intellectual leader for that movement. So this discussion of spirit and its role in Kemetic and African American culture, its central role, is going to be particularly located within the 1990s and how it was developed from there, because a lot of what we're drawing from now is drawing from that. And we had great scholars at that time. Dr. Asa Hilliard, who was my good friend and who I probably wouldn't have been tenured without his support, who also wrote the introduction, one of the introductions to my book, The Mother Principle. And when he received it, he left me a message on the phone. And I wasn't home, so I picked the message up and he said, "I received your book and I cried." Asa had read the book twice and had given me his views on it, and then had written, along with John Henry Clark, the introduction. So we had giants like Asa Hilliard. We had giants like little brother, called himself Jake from Chicago. He's really from Jake from Texas. But he got woke up in Chicago when he went to the Center for Inner City Studies, and a brother named Dr. Anderson Thompson got him and turned him around. And he became a hardline Pan-Africanist, Afrocentrist, one of the two best people on ancient Kemet. And then we had Dr. J, and then working with him, Professor James Smalls. And, we had a bunch of giants. You hear me? A bunch of giants. Doc Ben, the bad boy, who couldn't go anywhere without insulting somebody. Some of them needed insults, and others I wondered, Doc, why did you say that? But one bad brother, as in good, So at this time, the 90s, this is a period where we have Black communities being hit in 68 with deindustrialization, jobs being taken out of the country, and it's beginning to impact our families. Dr. Wade Noble, Dr. Nathan Hare was the first one to note this, to note the erosion of the Black family in his own research, his own book. And so we see this decline of the family beginning around 1968, 100 years, 75% two-parent households in this country. Marriage rate of Blacks was higher than whites, and now it's 29% two-parent households because of these forces. So this is right after or during the strike, at the very point that the Black Studies strike is carrying out a strike and succeeding in creating the first Black Studies department in the U.S. spreads around the country, then what we're seeing is the further attacks on Black communities, assassinations of leadership, Malcolm, 3 on Me, and numerous others, the smashing of the Black Panther Party, and the attacks on Black communities, because what they're seeing is the power elite is seeing that Black communities have been the foundation, along with the extended family that nurtured these communities, have been the foundation for launching movements for liberation. So they're in there to try and break up Black communities, what they call Negro removal, urban removal programs, and now gentrification. But that didn't really work in the sense that we just moved to another community and kept doing the same thing. Ferguson breaks out in a overwhelmingly Black community. It kicks off this hip hop generation's phase of struggle. And then we see drugs being put in the community by the CIA, which they admit, and the rise of prison industrial complex, Black males especially, who no longer have jobs, whose communities are torn down, their businesses are fragmented, and the jobs have disappeared that could really pay enough for you to support a family. And I note that one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, in the survey that she did, over 200,000 Blacks, the number one issue that young Blacks list is good paying jobs that they can raise a family on, because it's the poor paying and no paying jobs, meaning no jobs, that has led to the major cause behind the breakup of Black families. And it's the San Francisco freedom movement that I was privileged to lead that provides the model for how to handle that one. You understand? Huh? So the thing is, we're faced with this when this Afrocentric stuff starts to emerge in the 90s. It is a response to what's happening in our communities and the fact that the youth are being put in a position that our youth have never been put in before, leading to a generation gap. And that's one that still plagues us, though it's not as bad as it appeared to be a few years ago. And I say that because it's the youth who have also put forward some of the most sophisticated movements that put Trump out of the White House that most of you don't appreciate. And I say that because I don't hear a single comment about their contribution. Black Lives Matter. They drew from the best of our leadership traditions. In my book, well, I'm going to that later. So, you know, we're faced with this, and this means that when it comes to Black studies, because I'm going to look at this spirit thing, especially from this standpoint, Black studies is going to have to change, because the 60s brought us in and it was a high water mark, but it's the beginning of the low water mark. We didn't see it. 68 is also when King was assassinated, you know? And so it's clear that we've got to address these issues, and you're going to see that spirit comes up as the key component of how we address these issues, in case you wonder where I'm going. You know what I mean? In 1980, see, in my organizing, I start with the San Francisco Freedom Movement, and that's the only successful Black freedom, Black power movement in the North between 63 and now. I've gone through some of that. If you look at my first show on the awakening, you'll see that I cover that. And then there's one where I'm speaking at the main branch of the San Francisco Public Library. That one has a picture of Angela Davis on the front, and there's a lot of picture backups and stuff for a summary of that movement. And that's the next book that I'm going to be writing. So that movement is one that really addressed some of the issues that we're facing now that can be helpful in us resolving it now. So I was in that movement until 66. Then I formed what is now known as the Pan-African People's Organization. That's been in operation from 66 to now. We've done a lot. I've talked about some of it on previous shows. And then I'm moving to encourage people around the country, and I'm a part of a motion in that direction of forming a Black United Front, a national Black United Front. because I come out of movements where it's not centered around one person. It's not about me or you or my organization. It's about power for our people. LaShonda Henderson, E. Franklin Fraser's Negro Family in the United States was published in 1969. Yeah, very important book, even though he made the mistake of thinking that slavery had destroyed our culture. That was his big mistake. But he was a great scholar and put forward some great work. And in fact, his study, The Negro Family in the United States, is the most comprehensive study of the Black family done by any scholar. The Voodoo Maroon. Black studies could take us so far. We have to graduate from that Afrocentrism and whatnot and realize that the paradigm of Maroonage is truly the way to sovereignty. Well, we'll see about that one. See if that's any different from what we're dealing with here. So by 1980, a number of forces come together and build the National Black United Front. We hold a convention in New York, National Guard Armory, and we launch this organization. It has chapters in different parts of the country, and the program that unifies the National Black United Front is one that I put forward. It took me a year or so to persuade them to get on board with this, and it was called the World Afrocentric Educational Plan. It was for taking Black studies and putting it in the public schools. And this was a major movement. And this is part of the context for what we'll be dealing with in the 90s. And then there's the formation of ASCAT, the Association for the Study of African Classical Civilization, in the mid-80s. And so the scholars are coming together and really beginning to put out their research. And you have hip hoppers who are picking this up and others. In 1990, my book, The Art of Leadership, was published. And so I took a tour of the South. I hired a brother who was good at book promotion, and we rented a car. And for 2 weeks, I traveled throughout the South, pushing the book and volume 1 and 2. And according to Scott Brown, who is the author of the Book on Us organization, but is a major authority on African American music, he saw that book as having a major impact on the African-centered cultural renaissance. It's the only book published that was political. The others were historical, cultural, and otherwise. But this one is giving direction to people on the ground, because NBUF, among others, Pan-African People's Organization, and many others, we're doing ground organizing around the country and around the world. So as I'm traveling from Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I speak, going into Texas, Dallas, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, and then other areas of the Midwest, Kansas City, Missouri, and St. Louis, Missouri, and some other areas. And as I'm traveling, one of the places that I signed books was a bookstore in Dallas, Texas. It was run by a sister named Emma Rogers. And see, we had been at work on this African-centered stuff for a while, and then she is the first one to coin the term that I heard, African-centered cultural renaissance. I'm in the store, we're speaking, and she says, because she's observing this with the people who are buying books and stuff, she said, there's an African-centered cultural renaissance going on throughout the country. And so when I get back, and then while I'm on this trip, I stop and I speak at a church called Greater Romani Church. And it had, at that time, 800 members. And the minister of the church didn't take any money. He was doing this free of charge. And later, 2 years later, I go back. He's got 10,000 members. This is an African-centered church. It was Baptist. It later becomes interdenominational. But what it's showing you is this African-centered cultural renaissance is having its impact on the Black church. And then about 2 months before the Million Man March, I speak at Reverend Reed's church in Baltimore. There's another 10,000 member African Methodist Episcopal church. Now he's a bishop. His grandfather had been a bishop, and his father, AME Church, one of the best read people that I have ever seen. And he had me in for 2 nights, Friday night, talk about the art of leadership, and then Saturday night to talk about the mother principle. And he would add Farrakhan in, speaking out of his pulpit. He had all kinds of programs to deal with drug addiction and various other things. He's now the bishop in Florida. Good state for him to be in to deal with the madness in Florida. The guy with a BA degree from Yale, a master's degree from Harvard, and then a religious degree that amounts to a PhD from a seminary that deals with religion. And then you had Jeremiah Wright. See, I'm giving you the context because some of y'all, you think that anything that's got to do with the church is backward and everything else. Remember, I'm telling you, this return to the spirit was both African and New African, and part of that had a church base. And so Jeremiah Wright, he at this point is the dean of Afrocentrism in the Black church. And, that's the church that Obama came out of, what I mean? Brilliant brother. So in 1990, when I get back, we have a convention, and I'm the luncheon banquet speaker. So I'm telling them, there's an African-centered cultural renaissance going on, and we're at the center of it in terms of this African-centered educational movement. So I'm talking about bringing spirit back, making sure that spirit is at the foundation of what we do and why it's been the missing link in some cases in our discourse on our history. I am showing you how this worked inside the academy and the Central Academy, which is San Francisco State University, that's a mothership of Black Studies, which I was chairing between 84 and 96, a job I didn't want. I'm an organizer. I'm a teacher. I did not want to administer and hold hands with faculty people. You know what I mean? I did not want to, but I had to. It was put on me. I had to. And then I saw the opportunity. And so in 1990, I call a retreat of Black Studies. And this retreat is held at a real nice hotel in South San Francisco. And people could come and, relax. But it was mainly a retreat with no agenda. The purpose was to find our direction. That was the purpose. Where do we go from here? Because coming out of the San Francisco Freedom Movement, CORE and SNCC, Congress of Racial Equality, and Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, we were improvisers. And so we didn't just come in with a predetermined plan. It was like jazz. How we moved depended on the groove, depended on the beat. And so I didn't come in with a predetermined answer for where the department needed to go. And I was in the thick of the organizing at the same time, the African-centered movement. And by 90, I'm starting to write the mother principle, But I was not going to come in with my direction coming from me, meaning coming from what I'm good at. I'm a historian, philosopher, political thinker with a lot of stuff underneath that. And so I didn't want to do that because I wanted us to be addressing the major issues facing our people, and whatever that required us to do inside the academy, then that's how we would address it. So we had this retreat, open-ended. And, we're good at open-ended stuff. We're good at coming up with new stuff. So in the early part of the retreat, then Dr. Wade Nobles, who was a key part in this shift, in this discipline, his partner, Dr. Lawford Goddard, who also taught at San Francisco State, was a part of the retreat. And he made an observation, and this observation provided the basis for us shifting and centering the discipline on spirit. And you ain't heard no other department in the country that's done this. You hear me? And everyone should. And so he makes the observation. We started off, he said, interdisciplinary. That means, we had psychology, we had economics, we had political science, we had history, we had family studies, we had religion, we had music, we had, interdisciplinary. But he said, we're not interdisciplinary anymore. And what he was going to say then described the growth of some of our best scholars. It described the way in which in ancient Africa, scholars were shaped to begin with, their focus, their orientation. And then I knew what we could hang that hat on. And he said, we're not interdisciplinary, we're multidimensional. One word, multidimensional. I'm a philosopher first. I'm a strategist first, and then of disciplines, philosophy, but it's the spirit system of Africa and of Afro-America, because I do both. You can't learn one unless you're internalizing it in your own situation. And so when he said that, that's it. I knew what the discipline shift would be. And so after the retreat, I pulled Wade Nobles together and another brother, James Todd, who was going through the same PhD program with me. And I said, Black studies came into being based on history, African and African-American history, and then everything else that fell underneath that. And Malcolm X was an inspiration for that, as he said, of all studies, the best field is history, And then Dr. Nathan Hare came in, and what he did is he constructed a multifaceted, interdisciplinary curriculum. And he was a solid scholar. When I pulled them together, I said, we continue with history, we continue with the Black studies stuff, but now we got to take it to another level, and we got to add some stuff. And what was that stuff we added? The driving force of the discipline would be, and it's the same driving force in the culture, would be African and New African philosophy. And what is philosophy? That's the deep thought of a people. That's Jacob Carruthers' favorite term. The Dogon call it deep knowledge, and I come out of the Dogon system. And I think Jake got his term by modifying that from the Dogon system, from deep knowledge to deep thought. And when you're dealing with that, and then in the African-American thing, it's coming out of the depths of voodoo, which was the basis for the culture of Africans on the plantation, then got dropped into what's called Black Christianity. And its heart is expressed in the philosophy of the spiritual blues. And so I pulled them aside and I said, we need to center this discipline on philosophy, African and New African philosophy. Now, I really want to stress this New African part. In the faculty at that time, we had J. Alfred Smith Jr. and for a while, Sr. And they came out of Allen Temple Church. Allen was a founder of the AME Church. But this is one of the best Black churches in the country. Built all kinds of housing for Black people all over the place. Got a Black Family Life Center that is a copy of a Family Life Center set up by St. Stephen's Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. And I had also worked with them. So that input from the Black church, a conscious Black churchman, and by the way, the Art of Leadership Volume 2 has a chapter on the Black church, largely because of J. Alfred Smith Jr. kept getting on me. You got to have the Black church in. You got to have the one. He's right. And I worked with the church. I know you can't organize the Black community unless you've got something going on with the Black church, even though some Black youth think not. It's the only institution you own other than your families. you know. So we make this decision that we are going to center the discipline on spirit, but focusing on the rubric of African and African American philosophy, because that's where you can hang it. And African and African American philosophy covers everything, because if it's spirit, it's covering all dimensions of African, African American, African global life, period. All of it. Whatever you want to talk about, economics, families, politics, history, culture, what you call religion, but spirituality, because this wasn't religion we're talking about. So this has been the missing ingredient in the Black Studies discipline. And this decision was revolutionary. Now, most of you won't think so. Of course, it's not if it's just spirit. If it's just, well, we're going to get the feeling of the spirit and the spirit is going to come down. No. We're integrating this into every area of our disciplines. And it is based on the reality that if we don't, we're going to continue to produce mental Europeans. That is, people who are getting a lot of good information on African history, African culture, African American history and culture and everything. But it's going to be in the European way, the way that Schlesinger said made the scholars they train no threat. But when you go the way of the spirit, and we had not yet figured out how that would translate into pedagogy. The book that I'm finishing now provides the alternative when it comes to pedagogy or methods of teaching that are African-based, that address the light within and bring the light out that is within, But not only that, deals with how we take people from one level of understanding to the level of mastery. That's only for people who want to do the hard work. We hadn't reached that yet, but we were on the path. But the main thing is we knew we had to shift that paradigm so that we could touch the spirits of our students better. Now, some of us were already doing this in the classroom, but as a discipline, we had to do that. Now, that ain't an easy thing to run up inside of a Plato freak factory, where you're creating people who are supposed to be real smart and can quote everybody and haven't got an original thought of their own. You know what I mean? That's not an easy thing to pull off. Now, no sooner than we make this decision and we start to meet and plan and stuff like that, because we had to keep our whole faculty on board on this. And then we would hold assemblies of all our students, over 800 of them. That wasn't all of them, but a lot of them, to get their input on what they wanted. It was a whole bunch of stuff we were doing. Then suddenly, and I mentioned this before, but not in this context, there's an effort to wipe us out. And that goes from 90 to 92, a 2-year effort. And that effort was rougher and tougher than to win that struggle was rougher and tougher than winning the strike. The strike took 8 months or so. This took 2 years. And you had the combined powers of first the Hoover Institute, the CSU, California State University system, and then, you had a host of corporations coming down on our head. And I was targeted as the central point for this disruption. And the move was being made to take my courses, particularly course on Black politics, and duplicate it. And if another department can teach what you teach, it's the beginning of putting you out of business. So there's a whole set of maneuvers by the president to begin that process of knocking us out. And then it would have knocked out the College of Ethnic Studies that's made of Asians, Latinos, Native Americans, and us. Came about as a result of the strike. So at the same time that we're rewriting the discipline, we're fighting a battle for our survival. And I have to admit, I did not know, none of us knew that the Hoover Institute was behind this until we defeated them. because afterwards, then they publish a memorial where they say their purpose was to wipe us out. We're the mothership. They didn't say this, but I know they were going to move and wipe out all Black Studies departments. We're the mothership. Take the mother out, you taking everything out. And they had 32 of their scholars sitting in on our classes to spy on what we were teaching, because they were going to write a book on our death. The book never came out because we didn't die. I told you, I've never lost a battle I lead, baby. And this one wasn't easy. That's the only battle that I fought on the defensive. I'm always launching the attacks. But in this case, I'm just starting to meet with my faculty to start to shape this discipline shift. And we get this attack. So I have to take off a semester so I can organize the forces to fight them. And I get 100 community organizations, the ILWU, International Longshoremen's Union, all kinds of churches, all kinds of community groups. They all owed us. We had saved them, you know. Plus, they liked what we were doing. And then I knew my enemy. That's the first rule in war. And see, fighting university battles ain't half as hard as beating corporations, even though the corporations was behind what they were doing. But it's still, all it took was the president signing a statement saying we were finished and we were finished. But I knew some things about him, and I knew what I could deny to him that he wanted. And so, you know, I knew how to play that baby. And so we stacked every kind of organization on top of their head, and we proceeded after that one semester to write this discipline shift. And when I stepped down, it would be 1996. I put it in concrete. It's called San Francisco State University Academic Program Review, Department of Black Studies. We would change the department name to Africana Studies later. Now, this is the politics in a university. If you're going to shift the discipline, they do what they call academic program reviews, where they review you to see if you're up to par. If you're not, they can shut you down. And so you need to institutionalize the changes you are making into a document that the university signs off on. And then what happens after that is every other chair that comes along, every other person we hire, they got to follow this or they can be dismantled. So I spent 3 months, the last part of my term as chair, 1996. This is the year after the Million Man March, writing this thing. And it was then judged to be the best academic program review done on campus. Why? Because we had spent all kinds of time into this shift. And we shifted the whole discipline so that it would support community revitalization. And that was basically it. So this is the key shift that happens. This shift, again, is in the discipline statement itself. It's an analysis of African American and African culture, and then centering philosophy and spirit in the center of that, and then history, family studies, a host of other things that are key to the discipline. At the same time, we're undergoing attack. Leonard Jeffries is attacked at City College of New York. Molefi Asante is attacked at Temple. And Jacob Carruthers and Conrad Worrell, their unit was attacked at the Center for Inner City Studies in Chicago. Conrad Worrell was national chair of the National Black United Front. He knew how to organize. He was able to defeat that attack. And Molefi is returned to his office a couple of years later. He was removed on false charges. But my good friend, Dr. Leonard Jeffries, lost his department. Now, these think tanks were behind all of this. The main reason he lost it is he didn't know how to fight. He's a good brother. I told him later, he admitted it. He went to court. You don't go to court to fight these white boys. You got to go to the streets. So that was a mistake on his part. But they went after him because, again, he was an African-centered scholar who also loved Africa, loved African people, and was doing good work for African people. So he kept his job, but the department went down the tube. But for the most part, we withstood this. And I should point out that in the midst of this attack, it's the Harvard nightmare team that they called the Dream Team, led by Skip Gates, that is orchestrating a big part of the attack against us. And the boy who's running for president now, he was central to that. And in the midst of our campaign to shift the discipline, here comes Skip Gates out to San Francisco State to meet with the president of San Francisco State and to tell him he never heard of us. We gave birth to Black studies. You never heard of your mother, huh? You know what I mean? And so Cornel West was out there shooting shots at Afrocentrism, attacking it, and they played a role in his destruction, in case you didn't know, you know? So when we do the shift in the discipline from Black studies to Africana studies, which the name change came at the end. People all react to the name change. Name to me is secondary. It's what's underneath. The icing is the name on a cake, but it's what's in the cake. Now, I always like the icing too, because I got a sweet tooth, but it's what's in the cake. You know what I mean? And so what we were doing then was linking up Ma'at and all of the dimensions of African philosophy, and Ma'at is the foundation of African philosophy, with the spiritual blues, both of which have spirit as its foundation. Basically, harmony, truth, justice, and right order, as they say in Kemet. Ma'at is the rudder of heaven and the beam of earth. It's the invisible direction of the cosmos. It's delicate. It's like a woman. That's why on the promotional, you have a picture of the goddess, the netter, Ma'at, a female. Why would Ma'at be feminine? Because justice, to maintain cosmic and earthly justice and heavenly justice, but cosmic justice, that's a delicate task. We're seeing that now with global warming and how it's disrupting the planet. And the return to spirit is really also the basis for drawing from a spirit science, as opposed to this mad science that the European has that attacks nature and warms it up and messes it up so they can pull everything out of it and don't worry about nature coming down on our heads as long as they got a lot of money in their pocket. And this is the other thing we were able to achieve, and this was extremely important. We're not only departing from the Plato doctrine, which is reason dominating everything, spirit out of the picture, but we're making spirit central, as some of our faculty had already been doing. But then I remember, and this is the second reason that I'm dedicating this show to Miriam El-Wadi. Miriam El-Wadi had said that it didn't make any sense to have Black studies that was humanities and social science and not have the sciences. And I always thought about that. I said, yeah, that makes sense, you know. Now, we can't give a degree in chemistry or physics or biology. We don't have the labs, we don't, it's a BA degree. You're going to grant one or the other. But what we can do is we can offer courses that introduce people to the sciences. And we can frame it within a Kemetic, Dogon, Yoruba, Asante, New African framework. And what is that again? Spirit. And guess what? That's the only way you'll be able to offer it. So I hired a brother, and he had a PhD in chemistry, Grant Venerable, from the University of Chicago. Now that's like the Holy Grail. University of Chicago, Harvard, Yale, these are the premier institutions. Hired him. And then I already had a brother who was a lecturer, had a master's in chemistry, Vunilelu Wabogo. And he and I are the ones that have shaped the sixfold stages to mental freedom. He's Afrocentric, you know. And so we had people that could teach the course from a scientific perspective. So we framed courses in chemistry, biology, physics from a Kemetic framework. And we put them forward for general education. General education is you're required to take those to graduate. But you're not supposed to be able to do that, because if you duplicate, in this case, science, they're going to stop you for good reason, just like we stopped them for teaching our stuff. But then again, this is the wisdom of spirit. So we have a meeting with and I've mentioned this before in a previous show. We had a meeting with the head of the chemistry department. He's a Jewish American, he's a chemist. So he's in there to tell us he's going to block us and everything else. And so, I said, listen, I'm going to do you a favor. I don't ever do this with anybody. I'm a strategist. I never reveal my strategy. And when you're finished, you're just finished. You don't even know how you got finished. But I'm going to tell you how I'm going to finish you on this one, because there's nothing you can do about it. He said, what is that? So see that guy there, Grant Venerable? He's got a PhD in chemistry. Now, I know no one in your department has one from a university like that, but I know that's not going to prevent you from stopping these courses. But once we have them on the books, he's going to teach them. Do you know why I'm in this meeting? I said, I'm about as scientific as my dead cat. I know enough about science to just talk about, why it's important and stuff like that. But I'm going to tell you how we're going to whip you, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. He said, what's that? In physics, you have this idea of waves and particles. You call it invisible energy. And then there are those who say there's consciousness that is the main force in physics. You don't know anything about that. I know. But I said, this is how we're going to beat you. We're not teaching physics, chemistry, and biology the way you are, especially physics, as some kind of just energy. This is a spirit. We're teaching a spirit science. And this spirit science will save the planet. And so you can't say we're duplicating you, because I know you're not teaching no spirit science. So he walks out the door. And then as he's walking out, he says, I'm going to fight you, but I admit all the breakthroughs in science come from the spirit realm. By the way, that's the topic for the next show. You'll see that. Shows all the innovations in science. Every last one of them comes through spirit. Every last one of them. So why shouldn't we center this discipline on spirit? Not just because scientific innovation comes from that, but every kind of innovation. But not just because innovation comes from that. That's the heart of being human. But that isn't just the heart of being human. That's the heart of existence. And spirit is consciousness. That's the high consciousness of God. If a university is really about training people to do that, then it's going to be about dismantling capitalism. And so we got that through. And so we became the only department of Black, and we later changed the name to Africana Studies, that had spirit in the core. In this case, in science, as well as history, politics, driven by philosophy. Dogon, specifically, Kemetic, Yoruba, Asante, and African Americans, we got some deep philosophy. If you got the popular culture of the United States and the world, then it means there's some deep thought driving it. And underneath all of it is spirit, the beautiful light, that intuition that resides inside of you. When you don't know the way, it gives you a way. You hear me? It's that part of you that makes you divine. And there are many dimensions of spirit. And African systems are best at exploring this, though other systems explore it fairly well also, other systems of color. Today at San Francisco State, we have a new chair. His name is Dr. Petrie. And Petrie is also from Louisiana. In fact, he's not far from Bunkie. And he's the perfect the perfect type that we need to lead this department, because Southern blacks, when they're solid, they're really solid. And this brother here, he's a scholar and he's a spirit man from Louisiana. Petrie, little guy. I love him. He's a good brother. And he'll protect that department and see that it goes forward. Our students, you know, we had 3 crops of students that were the best. The Black Student Union that made the strike, the Pan-African Students Union, that a number of people who are in the Pan-African People's Organization led, and then the BSU that established the Black Unity Center at San Francisco State, and may well have had the smartest students in them. And they were all smart, but this was an exceptional group of students. You know what I mean? An exceptional group. And heavily led by women, because now a majority of students in universities, period, black or white, are female. And a significant number of them are from Eritrea, and they're Eritrean Americans. They were born here, and then African Americans. And these were people majoring in chemistry, engineering. The brother who was the most brilliant of all graduated with a BA degree in science and went straight into a PhD in some real complex area of science, you know. But these were students with integrity, and we supported them when they got messed with. We saw that the hands were taken off of them, and they went back and saw that this department stood strong. And then we've had strong people like Dorothy Saruta, who was chair of Black Studies for 14 years after me and stabilized it, and many others. Dr. Dean Philip McGee, who passed on, who was one of the leaders of the Afrocentric movement in psychology, led by Phil McGee, Dr. Phil McGee, who was Dr. Wade Noble's teacher, brother named Khatib, who had formerly been in the Nation of Islam, and Naim Akbar, who had also been in the Nation of Islam and became Orthodox Muslim later. Those 3 of those taught in Black Studies, later Africana Studies at San Francisco State. And so the topic was Spirit, the Missing Dimension of Kemetic and African American Civilization. I thought it appropriate to show how you can drop it into the curriculum and pass it on to our students, and how it's essential for our independent Black schools to do the same thing, which is what our school, African Children's Advanced Learning Center, that's been in operation since 1972, and led by former students from San Francisco State and others. And we've had them on this show before, and if you look at that, you'll find it. So I just want to say, took me a while to come up with this one, because I got to be inspired when I'm doing this stuff. So I hope you got something out of it. Spirit, the Missing Dimension of Kemetic and African American Civilization. It's what keeps you going. It's the beautiful light inside of you. When they sing this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. We sang that song all over the freedom movement, San Francisco, the South, all over, you know. That little light is what we carried from Africa to the Americas and spread throughout the world. That light every human being has, but that little light that shines inside of us, which is God, that resides inside of your heart soul or heart mind, which is the God within you. It is that spirit force that endows you with unlimited creativity, specifically in your realm, the realm you were gifted for. And that's your real challenge in life, is to know why you're here. And that's to know your ka, or your ori, or your destiny, or your chi. Your destiny. What is it? That means, what are your gifts? What are you here for? And all of that spins around the spirit that dwells within, finding your light and following it, being it. George Washington Carver, the greatest scientist of the 20th century, said all he wanted to be himself. He wasn't going to let anybody shape him into something else. And that's not just the task for education, that's the task for life. That's your task. That's what this show is about. This show is about empowering you to be yourself. I'm not trying to get anybody to be me. I'm just providing a message. Be you. Be that God within you that you were put here to be. Make your contribution. And I know many of you are. And I learned from some of you a lot. That's how I've grown. In fact, teaching, to be a good teacher is to be a student. To be a good student is to be a teacher. It's always the twin side. My book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures. This book here, it comes from a question I couldn't answer a student. Huh? There? Yeah. And then God gave me the answer, and then I moved on. You know what I mean? Huh? So sometimes the best experience in your life is the mistakes you make, the pits you fall into that can lead to motherwit, the questions you can't answer that you seek to get. And in the end, they're in here. Hotep, I hope you got something out of this. And I hope you got something, any questions or anything you got to ask or observation you want to make. Alchemical Empress, thank you, lady. Appreciate that. Wolf Manlu, can we fully incorporate spirit all while being immersed in white thought? Yeah, sure. First of all, we're not as immersed in white thought as we think, in that we recreated a culture here based on spirit. And it's the oppositions you face in life that make you the strongest, you know? So it depends on how you approach life. Do you want to approach life as someone that's in charge of your life and not going to allow others to dictate it? Or are you going to approach it the other way? Now, I understand that, we face these forces, and some of us have been more fortunate to be freer in how we wield our lives, but a lot of it has got to do with how we think. As you think, so you are. So do you think you can? This is Lao Tzu, who always asks good questions and is one of our serious leaders in this process. I am in an African community in Illinois working on sustainability while listening, posting comments and questions after my second review. Yeah, very good. I get the impression that you're dealing with environmental issues. Is that right, Lao Tzu? And put that up when you get a chance. Lawrence Freelow, Dan Freeman. How do we systemize African and African American culture? African and African American culture is already systematized, and it's under attack, and it needs strengthening in terms of African American, but also African. But that system is already there. The question is, how do we systematize African and African American consciousness? And that grows out of the culture. And that's what we'll be doing when we have, I got to go count and see how many we have now. 40 people. We probably need 40, 45, because some people are not going to be available. I know how that works. And so we're going to do a year-long webinar 2 times a month, a couple hours each week that we do it, on the process for us taking our identity from where it is to higher levels. And that's the real key thing. But in terms of African and African American culture, we need to study it. I mean, it's a complex culture. African American culture is complex because we are living in the most complex environment that Africans live in anywhere in the world, with all kinds of ethnicities and problems and everything else. So it means that the culture that would develop here would be very complex. And no one fully understands this culture. And we have the negatives of the culture that come out of slavery and oppression that we have to discard. But we're talking about the strong features, the positive features of the culture. So no one's going to fully know this culture because you would have to specialize in certain areas. For example, with me, I love art. House looks like an art gallery, but I'm not an artist. I don't know the history of the evolution of African American art. In this case, I'm talking about painting, and drawing. But that's true for theater arts. It's true for poetry. So we have all these different dimensions. But what we need to know is the framework of the culture, the definition of the culture, and the way in which it works and how it's undergone change. And so in my book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap Caused by a Choice Between Two Cultures, chapter 6 is over 85 pages long. And so what I do in that chapter is describe the salient features of African American culture and what parts of Africa what was it drawn from. And then how did that transform? And I don't claim that all of this explains all of that. There's a book that I've mentioned before, Exchanging Country Marks by Michael Gomez. That's an excellent book on the formation of African American culture. And I drew from it when I was writing the chapter on African American culture. I also have a speech that I delivered at the Malcolm X Grassroots program, February 22nd, 2003, where they gave me a Grassroots Award. Asa Hilliard came in to hear the speech. It's up on my shows. It's entitled African American Culture, a Culture, Not a Subculture. So that kind of summarizes some of the salient features of our culture. And then there's a show called The Spiritual Blues, which Ogawa and I both consider to be the best show that's been done on this channel. And that it would be the spiritual blues testifies to the beauty of our culture, because its highest expression is in its art form. The art form is not the culture. Hip hop is an art form. It is not a culture. It draws out of African American culture, So we got to be clear about that. So this is, this culture, along with the cultures of Africa, it's the beauty of life. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's what woke me up. It was both an awakening into African American culture and African culture. And those two took someone brainwashed and opened my eyes up, So drawing on the spirit is key to that. Ogawa noted it's February 22nd, 2003, African American culture, a culture, not a subculture. Commissar, sometimes it's not how you make it, but how you take it. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we got anybody got any comments or anything to make here. Wolf Manley, a mother always gives her child what she needs, even if it's a whooping. Yeah, we need to cut back on that one. Yeah, and I want to stress this, as Brother Gawa said, hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't, and encourage people to subscribe to the show. Higher Hecka. Black people in America should maybe study the European Jew to see how a group of people gained power. Yeah, and how they got wiped out. Huh? Yeah. You know, the Jewish strength has been their weakness, has been their strength. Their weakness is they have not founded effectively nation states. They had the house of David that becomes a nation, and then they got Israel. And neither one of these stand up as any great successes. But their dispersion, them being spread all over the world, is a key characteristic of the Jewish people. And that out of that, they created networks. These were largely economic networks, the center of which is New York City, and banking and other kinds of things. So they had to take a liability, not having their own nation state, and turn their global presence into a strength. But they tended to make the mistake of assimilating too much in the countries in which they went, even though they still held on to their religion to varying degrees. If you look at Jews today in this country, over 50% of them marry outside of the Jewish people. And they have the most highly educated group. So women don't have the excuse that they don't have men that can hold up to the standard and produce for them economically and educationally and so forth, and vice versa. So there's something else going on there, you know. In fact, the majority of Jews have a very thin thread to base their identity on, very thin. And it tends to be Israel, but there are Jews who are opposed to Israel for good reason, given what you're seeing right now with Zionism. So they got problems, you know what I mean, in terms of how serious are they about being Jewish. You know? And then this Ganlodo African Voodoo Maroon monarchy. Black studies can only take us so far. We have to graduate from that Afrocentrism and whatnot and realize that the paradigm of Maroonage is truly the way to sovereignty. It's not either or. Maroonage is basically Africans going into their own communities in slavery into the mountains and continuing their own culture and resisting and fighting. And then out of this came the Haitian Revolution and many other rebellions. And we had them in the US, but they weren't as strong given the numbers that were aligned against us, the number of whites. But still, we had Maroonage here as well. The biggest form of Maroonage here was petty Maroonage. That's running away because we had that option. You know, Jacob Carruthers concluded that had the Civil War not been fought, petty Maroonage would have destroyed slavery. It may well have. You know. So we need to do what the Maroons did, draw from the best of our traditions, but you don't cast out the baby with the bathwater. Black studies was good for its time. Afrocentrism is now, you know. Wale, truth, trust, unity. Truth breeds trust. Trust breeds unity. No one unifies with those they do not trust. No one trusts those who do not speak truth. Speak truth always. Yeah, true. This whole thing of trust and then verify is stupid. You verify and then trust. That's something that an empty-headed Ronald Reagan would come up with. You know what I mean? Wally, again, truth builds confidence, not only your own confidence, but others will also have confidence in you. Teach your children to always do the same, speak truth always. Yeah. Again, Gon Lodo, totally with you about the historians ignoring spirit. And I will add culture. Many of our revolutionary scholars do not acknowledge spirit and culture. Yeah, that's true. Not just a big mistake. You're not a revolutionary if you're not drawn from the best of your culture. Wally, again, follow the way of your ancestors, speak the truth. Wally is talking about the Niger people, which he is, and proud of. So Alchemical Empress, surprised that my roots are in Bunkie, Louisiana. She's familiar with that place. It was extremely racist from what I remember. Yeah, I'm sure it was. So small they say you could close your eyes going through it and miss it. Common Czar, after the show, listening to You Can't Make Peace by Willie Dixon is a helpful reminder of the work to be done. Yeah. Chad Jomo Kenyatta. My daddy used to say, I'm just like my grandfather. We even got shot at the same shoulder. Oh. Kamazar talking about it's important. It would be good if everybody cared about everybody. Yeah. Kamazar, producing justice is about spirit. The practice of justice is the spirit working through you. Thanks, Wolfman Lou, for trying to encourage people to hit the like button when they come on. You know. Okay, let's see what's new on the bottom. Alchemical Empress. It was Dr. J. Alfred Smith. They got our class to fight to make our African spirituality class a regular part of the theology curriculum, not just an elective. He had us chanting, "We are not an elective." Right on. I assume you're talking about, was it Dr. J. Alfred Smith's junior or senior? I think you're talking about junior, but yeah, right on. I see it junior at the Monterey Jazz Festival regularly. Alchemical Empress, do you feel that the rise of the African feminine energy is bringing back the spiritual component of our history, ancient, civilist? Yeah, I think that partially caused by breakdowns in communities, sisters have had to fill gaps they didn't have to fill before, doing too much in the family. And that's pushed the feminine energy forward. And with the youth, these movements have had a strong feminine energy. And that's restoring a lost balance that we need. So, yes. Ayiti Blues Spiritual, as Baba Phil Valentine L teaches us, the combination of the word spirit, breath, and ritual, breathing ritual, aka proper diagrammic breathing. Yeah, it's a part of it. A lot of different ways to access the spirit. Wally, the easiest and quickest method to have everything you want is simply to want everything you have. That's pretty good. So, talking about breath and spirituality, Ayete Blues, Wale. The opposite of right is not wrong. The opposite of right is left. Okay. Wally, attention to anything is giving it power. Try giving your children more attention and see how powerful they become. Where attention goes, energy flows. Yeah, good point. That's true with your mate. That's also true with yourself. Well, very good. So I'll see you next week. Enjoy this, and you all have a good weekend. Hotep.